a greenhouse would provide another classroom space, like an outdoor classroom space, where our goal is to have a greenhouse large enough that can hold an entire class of students, where teachers can teach lessons, do read-alouds, or teach science lessons, as well as have kids get their hands in the dirt, which is what they really love.
And we also wanted to have a space for community members to come in and learn about gardening and plants, teach us about gardening and plants, and just have a space in the community.
Yep. Should we let Gideon talk?
Sure.
Oh.
Who's that?
Okay. So Alicia is going to come up because part of our plant sale this year, we incorporated a lot of botany lessons. And so Alicia is going to tell you about some of the botany lessons.
Do I speak?
Yeah.
Okay. So the majority of the fifth graders made the fertilizer. Well, all the fifth graders, and wait, hold up. That's not right. Oh yeah, sorry. Our fertilizer is made with freeze-dried banana peels, oranges, and coffee grounds. We cut them up into small bits and pieces, and we put them on a freeze dryer, and then we let it freeze dry over like 48 hours, and then we will all like smash it up, and then make it into fertilizer. And the majority of the fertilizer is made of coffee grounds. Thank you again, Ms. Bickle, for teaching us how to make it. We worked very hard on making it. We spent at least 5 months or 6. Our botany lessons were very important to us. Learning about how to make fertilizer and how to grow new plants and vegetables. It was very fun also. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so like Alicia was saying, the botany lessons are part of the Montessori curriculum. So we spend an entire 5 to 6 months on botany, where students are getting their hands in the dirt and growing plants and learning about the fundamental needs of plants and macronutrients, the shapes of leaves and roots and all that kind of stuff. So dissecting the seeds, life cycle. So the greenhouse will be a huge part of our curriculum as well.
We had some plants last year, and then we also got thousands of plants donated. Thousands of vegetable seeds donated from seed savers that we all planted. We had to separate and repot some of the plants that were donated because they were rooted a lot. Dirt and pots were bought or donated. We figured out when to water them, when to plant them for the best time because they would grow better. We watered the houseplants once every other day, and then we watered the vegetables every day. The watering took 30 to 45 minutes a day. We moved the plants into the right sun that they needed to help them grow better. We tried to repot or water. If they died, we tried to repot or water them to help them live. Sometimes we had to take a look at their roots to see if they were dead or alive. That's all I have. Except for, what do trees and dogs have a lot in common? They both have a lot of bark. Sorry.
So you want to start with the plant sale?
Okay. The plant sale was amazing, and we did a lot of different things. And I'm going to say a little bit about the art and how we ran the plant sale. In Miss Rathke's class, they made all these really awesome clay mushrooms and clay pot labels. They were all tiny works of art, and they really made our plant sale amazing. And our class, led by Miss Bigelow, made a lot of rock art, and we used acrylic paint to really make the rock art pop with color. We also got to run the plant sale. We all took turns being cashier and helping customers. We were all businessmen and women. We learned a lot about teamwork, being professional, and how to handle money and how to run a business. It was amazing to be a part of this. We all had a blast doing it. We all got a chance to shine and show off our talents. Thanks for hearing me talk. And I hope that you see how amazing our plant sale was. Now Shelby's going to talk about macrame.
So yeah, one of the other things we had was plant macrame. So we've been working on these for 5 months? Like right at the start of the school year. We began with very small pieces, only about that long, and we started to grow and make bigger ones, and then even use some fun wood boards. And these are a very nice decorative piece to add in your household, and I think they sold very well. We made about 60 pieces, and every single one sold, and we made about $900.
We want to incorporate all of these different disciplines and content areas in our project, and it really took on a life of its own, from starting with botany and then moving into art, and then creating little experts, as you heard from, in all the areas of our plant sale.
We kind of talked a lot about this.
Yeah. One of the reasons that we identified a greenhouse as something that we wanted at Northside is because the Northside does have a food desert, and our families have low access to grocery stores. There's not one within walking distance of our school, and we really wanted to bridge the gap in equity and access on the Northside for students in poverty and families in poverty.
Yeah, on top of that, the environmental inequity, because we are right in the middle of La Crosse. We don't have easy access to nature, so having 2,000 plants in our classroom and hallway brought the nature to us.
Some of our building engineers didn't love it all the time, but they're here. They're in support of the greenhouse to get it out of our school. And we along the way formed partnerships with community organizations, and the Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, the Franciscan Sisters, really donated to our cause. They'd send plants with Mariah's mom, who works with the Franciscan Sisters in Rochester, and the local sisters gave us a grant for $9,000. And then we also partnered with Rotary After Hours, and Bradley's here representing Rotary, and they have like a Shark Tank. So they took our idea and they presented it to their group, and then they gave us a $10,000 grant.
And they're going to help us build the
Yes.
greenhouse.
So the heart of our project was always building community at our school and with our neighbors.
Yeah, and giving our students a sense of pride and joy in the work that they're doing. They worked really hard to put on this plant sale, hours and hours of time spent. So, and time here now too.
Yeah. So that's all we have for you today. If you have any questions for us or the students.
Oh, yeah.
What?
This year, the students made $7,500 at our plant sale. What? Yeah.
Oh, yes. They set a goal, and if they met the goal, they could pour water. We should have had a video of that, but they got to pour water on Miss Bigelow for reaching a $6,000 goal, me for $7,000, and Mr. Shively, our other E2 teacher, for $7,500.
Yep.
We thought there was no way they were going to get it, but
Yeah.
That's why you made the
Yeah.
they did. Yeah.
Questions from the board?
You said you got an original grant. Was that from the Public Education Foundation, or who was the original grant
The
from?
original grant was from Donors Choose. We haven't hit up the LPEF yet, but.
The Sierra Trading Club, Sierra Trading?
Oh, we got
Not
one
Sierra
from,
Trading,
I don't know.
Yeah,
We got a local grant for 200 and then a Donors Choose grant, which was primarily funded by Mariah's mom initially,
And that was just for things like pots and soil, kind of things to get us started.
to get us started.
Now that more people know about us, like pots just get dropped off at the school and soil and things like that. So we haven't had to buy quite as many.
We had community members that brought hundreds of plants in to donate. And we were wondering what we were going to do with all the plants at the end of the sale. And a community member came to us and asked for our help. And they were having a sale to help put a girl through high school who had been trafficked in Africa. So that was right up our alley. And we donated the rest of our plants to their plant sale. So we got to help out in the community like we were helped.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you too for taking the initiative to do this, and for the students to be so willing to participate in this innovative idea. I mean, it sounds like an all-around great project where they not only learned about science, they learned about empathy, they learned about the community, and on. It just kind of spirals. And I know my daughter had to go to the plant sale because she'd heard about it, and she brought home a couple plants. So.
Awesome.
Good. Thanks for supporting us.
You guys want to say anything else?
No.
Other questions from board members? Thank you so much for coming. I'm definitely going to try that fertilizer out. All right, we'll move along with the meeting. If you have other commitments tonight, you can feel free, we can pause for a second. Otherwise, you're invited to stay for the duration. All right, so the consent agenda is a mechanism used by the board to deal with routine business that must come before the body. Are there any items that the members want to remove from the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the items on the superintendent consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
With a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Dr. Garcia, the items on the superintendent's consent agenda are approved as presented unless there are any objections. All right. Moving on to the board consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented.
So with a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Dr. Jimenez, the items on the board consent agenda are approved unless there are items that board members want to remove from the consent agenda.
I just have a question.
Yep.
Would this be the appropriate time to, if I wanted to have a discussion about the linkage summary?
The DWP
The
linkage
DWP
summary.
linkage summary, yeah.
Yep, we can pull that out and discuss that.
I don't know if there's any particular action, but,
We can just discuss it.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What did you want to discuss about
Does that
it?
come up next?
Oh, the DWP, when does that come up again?
Well,
Is that what you
no,
mean, or-
I would,
Oh.
yeah.
Yeah, I
yeah.
can make a motion to pull it out.
Okay, I would move to pull the DWP, get the name right, the DWP linkage summary from the consent agenda for this evening.
Is there a second?
Ooh.
I can second to have the discussion. Okay. So
Thanks,
with
Brad.
a motion by Dr. Sprague and a second by Mr. Korberg, we can discuss the DWP linkage summary. Do we have to dispose of the original motion?
So on this, you have to take a vote in order to remove something.
Okay,
So right now, we should be voting on this motion.
All
And
right.
if it passes, then we can
Okay.
deal with that. And if it fails, then it would
So-
just be considered as a whole.
all right, so all those in favor of removing that one DWP linkage item for discussion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Thanks.
now we can talk.
Hmm?
Cool, thanks.
So that is our next item?
Yep,
Okay. Really, my question is about the evidence of our equity focus. And I just wanted to draw attention to some of the comments that there seems to just be a lack of understanding among the parents and the representatives on the committee that this is even a focus of ours, even though it is, of course, pretty well ingrained in all of our policy language. And I'm wondering what more we as a board can be doing ourselves or directing through the administration to bring focus to that focus.
sure. Yeah, I mean, like the first thing that would come to my mind is the work that we'll do on the community engagement plan, as we have more of like a roadmap of who to tap into and how we can always bring in that sort of topic to the discussion, kind of like we do with linkages with staff and with the DWP, but if there are other ideas or thoughts, or if Dr. Engel has any ideas.
I think part of it might just be a matter of semantics. So when we say equity, maybe people don't know exactly what that means. If we said, do we do unique things for students that need more help? And they might be able to point to lots of things then where we have done extra things to help out students that need it more. Whereas, with just equity, they might not be able to. I know that the district-wide parent president last year had a very strong equity focus, and every one of our meetings had a presentation by kind of an equity-driven group or effort in our school district, and most of the members remain the same. And so I think it's maybe more a matter of like framing as opposed to explicit understanding about equity itself. I know when at the end of the year, Dr. Harsey compiles a list of equity efforts that have gone on in the school district, and we'll share that with the board, but it runs to over a dozen pages of various things, and a person on the surface might not see that as like an equity thing, but each one of those efforts is a way to kind of level the playing field and create equal opportunity for all students. So that would be my commentary. I could be completely wrong though too. It's my interpretation of that event.
No, that's really helpful for me. I was just a little, really taken aback by some of the comments in that. Because there seems to be such a focus, I think, at the district level and through the board policies themselves, that's not being translated, and I thought that was an area for some potential growth or improvement.
Agreed. If we ask that question, then we should expect to get answers, that are knowledgeable, or we need to frame it in a different way, I would say. But I would also add that I don't know that our staff linkages have provided a different outcome. I think it's maybe been similar in terms of kind of a thin, connection to equity efforts. I haven't been at those, but just in reading the minutes, I haven't felt there's been a significant difference from district-wide parents as our staff groups. But once again, I think framed differently. Do we do, unique things to help groups of students that have been historically marginalized achieve? And I think they would be able to list lots of things they do in their classrooms, their building does, the district supports.
Well, I think we saw an example tonight, they talked about it, so sometimes I think it's some of the efforts, and as we get farther into it, it's not always top of mind, but I can see, always opportunity to improve and make sure people understand.
I wonder if Dr. Engel's suggestion of simply phrasing the question differently and would and more explicitly would show up a difference between the perceptions of faculty who are saying, yes, we are providing equitable opportunities in such and such specific ways, versus the experience of parents, particularly parents who are coming from, disadvantaged communities, and maybe in more need of access to the resources that we can provide. If there's a significant difference between those perceptions, that could be a really good indicator for us.
And I would say on the user end, if I'm a parent or a student, I would hope that our district does things in such a way that they don't even notice it. Like, it's almost a given or a right,
Yep.
or it's not something that's a burden. If your field trip fee is waived, I hope that isn't something that, in best case scenario, it's not something you had to ask for, right? Like, there's no barrier, there's no potential for humbling oneself, in order to access that differential resource. If you get additional reading support because you're struggling right now, I hope you don't notice that, right? We've done it in such a way that it's seamless with everything else. You're not kind of set aside from your peers. You're not made to feel less than. Those things should be integrated into the fabric of what we do, such that a student or a parent might not even notice it. They just, my kid needed some extra help, so they got it. It would just be a fact of life.
Yeah, that'd be ideal.
Quite a few of the things that they listed in the things that make them proud to be part of school district of La Crosse are equity initiatives.
Right.
So they didn't call them that, but that's what they noted.
Does it go back to the question we talked about a few weeks ago of branding, or how we're engaging the community and talking, like what we saw tonight? But that should be PR right there.
Yeah.
And not using it for that purpose, but that is the stories we have to tell to the community, is all the things our teachers and our staff do every day to make sure we're doing the things that we're talking about in all of our metrics. So I think it goes back to that note I wrote, was how do we trumpet and how do we talk about the wonderful things that we're doing within the district to work on a branding. To me, it's a brand thing. I'm a business person, so it's a branding thing of what people think of when they associate the school district.
That was all I had.
All right, so since we were moving, I believe we have to vote on accepting or approving that linkage. So Laura, do we do that first before we go back to the others?
I would, yes.
Okay.
So I will move to approve the linkage summary as presented.
Second.
Okay, so with a motion by Dr. Sprague and a second by Mr. Korberg, we will approve the DWP linkage summary as presented. Okay, so now I will entertain a motion to approve all the rest of the board consent agenda. I don't have to list each one out, right? Okay.
So moved. Second.
All right. So with a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Dr. Jimenez, the items on the board consent agenda are approved as presented. That was a fun little experiment, wasn't it?
Thank you.
Well done.
All right, so we're moving on to board action. So in the past, we have tucked these into our consent agenda when we've sensed that there is consensus among what board members are feeling about these monitoring reports. But in our workshops, it seemed like there was quite a bit of talk about taking them out so that we can vote separately on them. So we can do that today. So this is not an information, it's an action, but if there are discussions, we can do that after we have received motions. So there's, if you'll note in board docs, there are motion options. So at this point, I'll entertain a motion.
In regard to the monitoring report for policy OE12 facilities and with respect to provisions of policy B, SR5, superintendent accountability, the Board of Education concludes that the superintendent and the district are in compliance.
Second.
All right. So with a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Ms. Berkedal, we'll approve this monitoring report as, or we will, do I have to read the whole thing again? Or can I say this monitoring report is in compliance?
I think that's fine.
Okay, cool. So all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, good job. All right, so we're moving on to the information items on our agenda, and the first thing we have up tonight is the Lincoln Middle School redevelopment process. So I'll invite the representatives from ISG up to the podium.
I've got just something to
Oh,
start
yep,
that with, if you
Aaron's
don't
got
mind.
some things to share too.
So our administrative fiscal management policies indicate that with the disposition of school property, that upon the superintendent's recommendation to the Board of Education, property no longer needed for school purposes, the board shall authorize property for disposal or sale. On January 23rd, 2023, the superintendent recommended that Lincoln Middle School was no longer needed for school purposes, and the school board voted to close Lincoln Middle School as of August 31st, 2023. Our administrative policy 6900 further indicates that if property is sold, public bids shall be announced. A public notice shall be published for a reasonable amount of time in the official paper, and the sale may include all or a portion of the building's contents. Given their positive reputation, recent experience in the Lincoln neighborhood, and work with the city of La Crosse, ISG, a local architecture and planning firm, amongst other things, was hired to help facilitate the sale of Lincoln Middle School property and assist in the development of a request for qualifications to solicit bids. So today, ISG is here to present on the work that has been undertaken so far and the next steps to take in the process of disposing of the Lincoln Middle School property. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Engel. Good evening, Board of Education. I'm Will Kratt with ISG. I'm a business unit leader here in La Crosse and was intimately involved with a lot of the previous engagement that Dr. Engel referenced. Next slide. That's just an overview of who ISG is, and next we'll talk about the project approach. So the first step in all of this is discovery of community priorities. So we have undergone numerous other community engagement efforts in the neighborhood prior to this that we were able to build upon for this. It really was community engagement that was centered on the neighborhoods as a whole and not any individual pieces of property or projects or what have you. And so it's a really great way to inform some of the themes, some of the needs, challenges, but also strengths of the neighborhood that should be taken into account should a project arise. And now, so we have that type of project available in the community. And we've had a lot of success at the meetings as well, and we'll use a lot of the feedback from the community, which included open discussion, open comment, their feeling of importance of previous engagement that had been or feedback that we had gotten from the community, and we'll use that to kind to put together the RFQ, determine some selection criteria. We're optimistic that there's going to be great interest in this project when the RFQ comes out, and so if we all do our jobs, it's going to be a very difficult time selecting who should move forward with the project. And so after we work on the creation of selection criteria, we'll complete the RFP and make it ready for public consumption, notice out to potential buyers or developers, and a lot of that boilerplate language is already ready that we can use after it gets edited down. But really, that's one of the big pieces we're looking for is what we heard from the community. What do other stakeholders, such as the school district, City of La Crosse, want to see in a potential future development? Onto the schedule. So looking forward, we're here tonight to talk about the process and give you a quick overview. We plan on having all of the community engagement that was done through the 3 meetings summarized by June 15th. We'll be back here at your June 19th meeting to review a draft RFQ, and hopefully it will be to your liking, and we can work with the administration to come up with a final release either end of June, early July. We anticipate giving interested parties, as much as 2 months to reply so that they have plenty of time to do a really good job laying out, their vision, looking into the financials of the project and all of that sort of thing. Next slide. So we did a number of community engagement events. The first one was at the Lincoln Middle School Commons on May 10th, and we had really great participation in that. A few of the board members were there, and several members of the administration were there as well. Got a lot of great feedback out of all the engagements. That was definitely the most popular. And then we had meetings 2 and 3 on May 23rd. Should say community engagement number 1 was, I believe it started at 6 o'clock, so it was an evening opportunity for people. On the 23rd, we had a noon meeting here in the gym, and a virtual opportunity as well that night. Those were a little bit less attended, but we wanted to make sure that people had many different opportunities at different times of the day, depending on what arrangements they needed. Next slide. So, as mentioned, we had 3 meetings, 2 in person, 1 virtual. Through it all, we had more than 90 attendees. I'm sure that includes some of the staff from ISG and the school district that were helping to facilitate, but really great engagement. And through the process, we had 321 unique comments. Of course, that's everything that got scribed on paper. There was really great conversation amongst community members there as well. So we've got a lot of really great stuff to build off of here, moving into the major themes. No big surprises there. A lot of it was aligned and in concert with the engagement that we've received in other places. And as many of you are involved in the community, I'm sure you're very aware of the strengths and challenges in that area as well. But largely the biggest theme is housing. Looking at a lot of different types of housing, diversity of housing in the neighborhood. And, so this block itself can certainly provide diversity, but throughout the neighborhood, people are asking for more levels of affordability, size of homes, rent versus buy, all those sorts of things. People are of different household sizes. Your needs are different throughout your life, whether you're a young person or somebody who's trying to age in place. And so really a focus on trying to create a more diverse housing stock on many different levels. Also the connection to the community, so the mobility. Interesting note that I always like to mention is Washburn neighborhood has in the past been classified as one of the most walkable neighborhoods in America. So it really does have great structure. The city of La Crosse has done a good job preserving the grid. That neighborhood is very close to our historic downtown and healthcare facilities and employment and recreation. Really, one of the missing pieces is food access, which is also on here. Much like the presentation we got from the students from the Northside Elementary, that's always a concern. People would like to see more neighborhood businesses. It's something that, our zoning policies over the years kind of made a lot of separation with residential and commercial, but, your coffee shop, your small cafe, other places where you can, kind of get some services or entertainment or food are something that are needed in our neighborhoods. Historic preservation has come up, obviously, specifically with Lincoln. You may have seen that I believe both Lincoln and Hogan were submitted at the same time for a stronger look at the historic preservation of those. So that's something that people will have to consider depending on where that is in the process, and that's information that we will provide to potential responders. Daycare is a huge one. Obviously, that's not specific to this neighborhood, but there are a lot of families in the neighborhood, so a lot of working families, and so that's a major need. And then other things, just creating that tight-knit neighborhood feel, community feel. You're probably aware of community gardens in that area. The fact that that facility is more than just a school, as all the schools are. It provides access to sports, after-school care. and some green spaces as well. So how can a future project or other projects in the area help to facilitate that? And last but not least, our next steps are to summarize the community engagement. So that'll be something that not only we use to develop the RFQ, but can be used and put into the record for this whole process. Development of the selection criteria based on community priorities and the feedback from you folks and other stakeholders. And lastly, to draft an RFQ that hopefully very clearly outlines the process, makes it easy for people to respond to, and creates a good mix of objective criteria, but also very visionary things as well. So with that, happy to take any questions. My colleague Jack Zabrowski is here as well, who's been very involved. So,
Questions from board members?
One, I don't know if you can answer, as far as the historic preservation of it, does that include the entire building, or is it a portion, like the major portion of the main structure that was originally there?
I have not seen the full application. I don't know, Dr. Engel, if you have. Or...
I attended the historic preservation meeting, and it was the older original portion. It didn't include the blue brick addition.
It did or did not?
Did not.
Using your expertise, if a building is designated for historic preservation, how does that increase or limit the pool of potential people who would be interested in this structure?
Sure. If I may, I might answer the question in a slightly different way. So if it is listed on the city's list of local historic preservation, and I am not a historic preservation expert, but many projects that I'm involved in do involve it. The city can limit the demolition or alteration of that building based on their zoning codes. And that's definitely something that we can point to potential responders to. Also something that we could provide a link to the board to help understand what the city zoning code is. Often not understood, the national and state portions of the National Historic Register do not, eliminate the ability to do that. It's really on the local level where that power resides. So to get into who it may or may not be advantageous to, if it were to be on the National Register of Historic Places, it should make it qualify for historic tax credits, which currently are 20% at the state level and 20% at the federal level. In order to obtain those tax credits, you do have to do renovations and alterations that are approved by the National Park Service. So that's where that really stringent criteria comes in. But it's a process that's been utilized several times in the city of La Crosse. It is definitely doable, and to certain types of developers is definitely appealing. To others who have not gone through the process, it can be very financially risky. You start, as I'm sure you know, with dealing with school facilities, you start digging into an existing building, you're bound to find things that you just didn't know. And I have to say the school district of La Crosse has really great records of that building going all the way back. But that's not to say that people didn't, not follow the plan or hide something in the walls that you're not familiar with. So it definitely adds an element of risk, but if done right and with a little bit of luck, it can be very successful too. So, will it make anybody walk away? I don't know. It might create the need for maybe some more partnerships where maybe somebody is a specialist in historic preservation and they team up with somebody who's maybe more interested with the rest of the block. It really won't know more until we start to get more phone calls and emails, but there definitely has been interest already. I know school district staff has provided tours of the facility, and so people are looking at both preservation and the other pieces of the block. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Still, again, from your experience with the historic preservation side of things, to what extent could that foreclose on the possibility of, for example, bringing ADA compliance for different kinds of housing? And would that prevent the opportunity of creating the kind of mixed housing that the community seems to be interested in seeing in there?
It wouldn't prevent it. It definitely adds challenges, and one of those challenges is more than likely you'd probably have to put an elevator in the building, because I don't believe there's a.
We have one already.
It has
But
one, yeah.
but I don't. But it may not.
Oh, yeah, might be in the addition, not in the original portion. I don't.
Yeah.
Joe would
So we'll look at that a little bit more closely, and certain anybody proposing on it will as well. But that's one obvious one. But if you can create, because you have to create other accessible routes into the building, sometimes that can be overcome by having, by meeting the percentages and criteria on the first floor. So it just really comes down to good design, creativity, the floor plan. Obviously, the first floor, typically has more common areas and that kind of stuff, so that might make it a little bit difficult, but that is a strategy that architects and developers can employ to hopefully minimize any added cost while still making the facility very accessible to anybody who might want to live there, should that be the use.
I have a question about the 90 attendees total. So in your work, is that like a good representation of the community, and were the attendees representative of the entire school district, or?
No. It's, we do what we can to, engage with people that are representative of the community, especially people that may come from marginalized groups or populations. But sadly, in our world, with all of the strategies and the tactics that we use, often it is not representative of the community, on many levels. It also includes, it's difficult for families. I would say a lot of the people that attended did not have kids in the school district, because families are busy at 6 o'clock, they're busy at noon. They may or may not be able to make the virtual meeting, and so but I will say, community engagement, I think, has become a lot more accessible and democratic since COVID, because there's so much more information online and people can engage. I mean, people have always been able to email or call or whatever, but I think there's a lot more opportunities for people to engage asynchronously than there has been in the past. And so I think things are getting better, but I mean, if we did take demographics of the people at those meetings, I would say it's not a great cross-section of the community, if we're being honest. But I think we still should be pretty proud of the number of people that did engage. And certainly it was a lot of familiar faces, that kind of engagement works well for certain people.
You had done some engagement in the community prior to this. How did the turnout for these events compare to those prior ones?
The Lincoln meeting in the school was, I would say, the largest out of all the engagements that we did. We did more meetings, and we did some engagements outside of asking people to come to us with that effort. So there was more opportunities for people. But I was really impressed with the turnout, and we got some really great ideas, and much like the policies that you all have, I think that there's a lot of people that are interested in equity and those sorts of things when they come to these meetings, and are asking those types of questions, even if they maybe haven't come from the background of the types of questions that they're asking for. They're at least asking the questions. Concern for others, I would say. So.
Other questions from the board? Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you all. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
All right, So we will move on to our operational expectation monitoring report, OE2, emergency superintendent succession. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Engel to introduce this one.
Thank you, Ms. Baumann. So this item is a part of the board's process of monitoring operational expectation policies. As I think I stated before, operational expectation policies are the gold standard for operations with which the superintendent and staff are expected to comply as they make day-to-day decisions for which they have delegated authority. The expectation is that the administration is in compliance with the listed indicators. This policy is relatively straightforward, and it's intended to ensure that there's a succession plan in case the superintendent is not available by means of normal communication or is deemed incapable of carrying the leadership responsibilities due to a mental or physical condition. A succession plan is on file and is in place for the upcoming year as well. The individuals selected have superintendent's licenses and are aware of their potential responsibilities. This policy has not been formally enacted in the 3 years I've been here, but I do occasionally go backpacking where there is not cell phone reception, so it's a possibility. And administration considers OE2 to be in compliance. And with that, I'll take any questions.
I have one comment. Dr. Engel, in your letter, the evidence, it states the superintendent shall designate at least one other executive staff member, but the actual indicator says will list at least two, so just a little bit of a confusion there, I think. Just something to clarify.
Yes, we can clean that up. So we list 2 in the letter.
Yeah. So we're good there. It was just the language that was in the paragraph.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, so again, this was just an opportunity to discuss. We'll vote on this at the next meeting. And if you wanted to jump ahead, you can see it will not be in the consent agenda. It will be a matter of board action. So we'll follow a similar routine next week. So we can move on to our 3.2. Dr. Engel?
Yeah, so this is a part of the board's process of monitoring results policies. Our results policies describe the outcomes our school district is expected to achieve for our students. Results monitoring allows the board to monitor the progress being made incrementally by the school district to achieve the board's results. The expectation is that the administration is making reasonable progress towards the goals identified. However, depending on the numbers and the context, the board may be challenged to use the data that are presented and weigh the results against all known factors in order to reach a fair and reasonable assessment of organizational progress. We might have to invite a legal scholar in for what the reasonable person standard is someday. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Lahucky.
Good evening. And away we go. Indicator 1 of results policy 3.2, co-curricular participation. The percent of students involved in 2 or more activities will increase. So next month, I'll talk about redefining ready, which is a different way to look at how we define success for our students. And this is a bit of a teaser as that'll be part of the data that will come to you in July. Research is pretty clear on this one that our students, when they're involved, they do better, not just while they're in our schools, but also in post-secondary options as well. The process of sharing information and recruitment, it does vary by building and level. Our coaches and advisors are doing whatever they can. This is generally a passion area for them. So social media, they'll go to the middle schools if it's a high school advisor, flyers, announcements, whatever it takes to get students aware that these activities are there. And I would also say when I spoke to the different activity directors, there's specific actions that they take as well to ensure that participation removes some of the barriers that we may run into, logistical ones, cost, transportation. I've known some of the club advisors and athletic coaches schedule physicals, transportation, I mentioned already, whatever it takes to get our kids to be able to participate as much as possible. We do have some barriers that impact our participation. It's not just the lacrosse barrier, but nationwide, we are seeing less students involved with athletics. A lot more students than ever before are focused more on one sport rather than 3 sports. That is one thing. We also have it's a blessing and a curse. The blessing is we have great partnerships in our community that provide opportunities for our students to participate that aren't school sponsored. Good Fight Club, Boys and Girls Club, your YMCA, they pull from our students in participation, but it's still great. It's still great, but it's not reflected in the data that you'll see here as well. We did unearth one data irregularity that I wanted to point out, and it's at Longfellow Middle School. Their approach to this is more, I would say, aligned with the middle school philosophy of exploration. So rather than designating a specific club that students are a part of, they're able to drop in, once a week they'll have club night, and students will be able to choose and bounce from club to club to club, and not formally documented. So one of our improvement strategies for next year will be, can we come up with a number of times that a student would participate in clubs called after-school club at Longfellow or whatever we want to call it, and that data will then be reflected in next year's report. So that's one takeaway in looking at this data a little bit more closely. You see a great list of clubs. Candidly, they don't all run every year. So it is dependent on staff interest and student interest. Your Rubik's Cube Club probably doesn't run every year, but if you have a group of students that love doing the Rubik's Cube, it runs. This year, the Dungeons and Dragons Club was a hit, and that was a newer club for us. So it is interest generated based on what students are interested in and what the staff that we have capacity and passion for. So that is more of a comprehensive list than everything that's offered every single year, to be fair. Looking at the actual data, you can see our middle school participation. We had 29% of our middle schoolers in 2 or more activities. Now, I will say, if you're a 6th grader, you have had less opportunities to participate in 2 or more activities than an 8th grader. And the same thing when we look at our high school data, a 9th grader would have to be more active their freshman year. So this data has captured the middle school experience, the high school experience, 2 or more unique activities. So if you were in 7th grade and 8th grade volleyball, that would count as one activity. It would have to be 2 different activities. Another barrier to participation I should say as well is some of our students, it's a luxury to be able to participate in these after-school events. Even when we reduce barriers as much as we can, it does pull them away from some of the needs that their family may have as well. You can see the data broken down by the different reference group. When I looked at this data, what jumped out to me was the socioeconomically disadvantaged status participation. That speaks to kind of the gift of being able to participate. And that'll be something we'll have to explore with the activity and coaches to see what we can do to even more reduce those barriers that may exist so we can raise that number up. If you turn the page, the last one, it has more of a longitudinal look of where we've been at and where we're going. 2021, COVID's always going to be our benchmark in a lot of things until we're a few years removed from it. 2021, we were just kind of coming off it. So you can see our numbers were lower, but you can see in 21-22, we started to rebound. And also in 22-23 now, we're above where we were last year, even with the Longfellow data issue that we'll have to address. When you look at our reference groups for 22-23, other than that SES that I mentioned earlier, every reference group had increased participation this year compared to last year as well. Do you have any questions about indicator 1?
I do. So I was, thinking about barriers and wondering, are the clubs, so I guess I have a couple questions. Are the clubs equally offered across all middle schools? So Gamer Club was really popular at Lincoln. Do the other 2 middle schools have something like that? Or is it more just tailored to what the students at that school want?
Yes, and. So sometimes some of our clubs do pull from both schools and come together. Sometimes it is a unique school activity.
And then in those instances where there might be clubs that students could be part of that are happening somewhere else, is there like a course catalog or like a club catalog that like shows them, these are all the cool things you could do that aren't sports or that aren't music?
That is a part of the recruitment fair that occurs, or where they talk about the different clubs. But Longfellow doesn't necessarily recruit to Logan Middle,
Sure.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it is what the staff capacity and interest is at each building.
And then my last one is, do the like CRVA students have the opportunity to participate in the clubs too? And
Correct.
would it be, how would they pick? If there aren't the same clubs at each school, do they just kind of know what's out there and go to them? Or are there people that they can speak to get ideas about what there is?
Sure, it differs. If it is an athletic club, they participate in the boundary school that they would reside in. If it is a co-curricular, they would be able to choose.
Okay.
Music is a good example. So our CRVA students that are interested in music can join a brass co-curricular.
Okay, thank you.
Along Andy's line, so does the data include the charter schools, Poly and Cooley Montessori?
Correct.
And everything? Okay.
Yes. And technically the Juvenile Detention Center, Bluffview Academy.
Do you think it would be possible to add in 2019 to 2020 school year, even the school year before that, just to have a baseline of how things were before COVID happened and it crashed the numbers of participation?
I could do that, but I would probably recommend this 2017-18 school year. I think COVID hit the spring of 2019. So that would be that 18-19 school year would only have 3/4.
It was the 19-20 school year, so maybe do the 18-19 school year.
18-19?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lehecky.
I can try.
Okay.
So I will look at the Skyward data system where we tag this, and if I can find it, I can generate it.
Okay. I mean, it's clear that the numbers are going up every year, except with the socioeconomically disadvantaged status students. I'm just curious where we are now, which is better than the last 2 years. How does it compare to pre-COVID?
Right. I would say this is our reality. You know, we're post-COVID, right? So some of these data, when we do look historically, our kids are different, our systems are different, our society's a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
But it is good to learn from the past. But
I would also offer that in 2020 was when we implemented coherent governance. And so while we were tracking lots of this stuff before, we did build tracking mechanisms, which were often not much more work, but things that needed to be done in order to track this stuff. And because we started measuring something, people started paying attention to it a little bit more. And so we may be able to find good data there, but anything post 2020, those systems are more well built than they were prior to that.
Okay. I certainly don't want you to spend, if it's easy to find, great. If it's not, you don't need to do a research study to find an answer to this.
I'll know by tomorrow. And does it sound fair is if I'm able to find it, then I'll add that information here so
Yes.
that when you look at it the second time around,
Yep.
you'd have that data built in?
Yep.
Is that, okay,
Thank you.
I can do that.
Can I ask one more quick question? I'm sorry, I'm kind of into the clubs because they're so important for culture, school culture and belonging. At the Central High School linkage, some of the students were talking about the difficulty of, doing all the clubs and having things scheduled at the same time or having to catch the bus to go home. Do we offer clubs during the school day, like during a study hall time where students, socially, SES students would be able to participate without missing the bus or having to miss work?
Some of the clubs are offered during the day.
Okay.
So depending on the school and how they do it, there's I think in the secondary stat time, it's kind of like what you need time, and so there is time carved out, but you can only meet so many clubs at so many times, they start to overlap. Some have to be after school, it's hard for cross country to meet, during the school day. And so there are some things where there are going to be barriers, but we try and minimize those as much as possible. I think there will probably be some embedded systemic barriers regardless of what we do, unless it's all during the school day, which is just not, possible, so.
I wonder if there's a way, I'm really glad that you included in here a discussion of the excellent outside resources like Parks and Rec and Boys and Girls Club and how they do kind of pull from our numbers. Is there a way for us in our data to find some way of valuing the way that those programs, that families are looking for those programs? And even just as like a self-reporting mechanism of like, do you, in addition to these school-sponsored activities, do you also participate in any outside activities? In particular, because many of those programs out in the community are geared towards our SES students.
That's
right?
absolutely correct, right. Generally, when you rely on other people for data, you don't get it. So it is hard to give up that control. However, we could ask our own students in some capacity to self-report. We may capture some of it that way. I do know, and we did have some students who declined to be recognized within their club for a variety of reasons. I can think of, for example, our Gay Straight Alliance Club. Those students declined to be counted in numbers, so that's underrepresentation and participation as well. So there's a lot of factors that go into this data for sure.
I ask that because I'm also looking at, although yes, the numbers are going up, in particular among our Hispanic and our Black students, they're practically within a margin of error between this school year and the past. And while any growth is good, and we're not talking about particularly large numbers here, if we're thinking about barriers to access, where are the barriers to access that seem to be in particular affecting those communities of our students and keeping them from finding greater access to our school-sponsored activities? I don't know if there was a question in there more about.
I'll provide a comment there for context. As a parent of kids involved in athletics specifically, in my opinion and in my experience, the biggest driver of inequity in school sports are the off-season clubs. They're extremely expensive in a lot of cases. And even if they offer scholarships, they travel. And so for parents who maybe could get their kid to participate on a scholarship, they still have the burden of going to Green Bay, Wausau, all over the place and spending whole weekends away for these clubs. And if you don't participate in them, you're out of the running for the school leagues the next year. Like, it's super tough because there's a huge and then it drives kids to only choose one thing rather than meet the expectation of 2 or more curriculars because they don't feel like they have time, because they really don't. And that's outside of our control.
I think that is a good question to ask, and maybe something we think about as we meet with students over this next year when we have an opportunity to ask them, what are your barriers to co-curricular participation, and see if there's a way that we can get at some of that for our historically marginalized groups.
Great comments. Okay, I think we can move on.
Indicator 2, academic and career planning, otherwise known as ACP. We're looking for over 95% of all full-time enrolled students in grades 6 through 12 will complete the assigned academic and career planning benchmark. And that is based on PI 26. Locally, we get to choose what ACP looks like, but we do have to provide career planning opportunities. So in the school district of La Crosse, when we look at the data, you can see the activities per grade level on the left, the activity that we have. I should define Zello. Zello is a digital platform that allows for exploration. Hey, if I want to do this particular profession, it'll provide ideas regarding what sort of courses you should take. What are the career outcomes? What are universities or post-secondary options or the world of work? You can explore any of those within Zello. And within Zello, there's lessons, learning style lessons. Are you hands-on? We saw our Cooley Montessori folks today, right? Getting down and dirty in the dirt, literally, with the hands-on learning. Some of them are our counselors provide a lot of leadership by lessons in direct contact with students and families to help with consultation regarding those career choices and the courses that you should take to best prepare you for those career choices. Next steps, I anticipate in our language is purposely vague for activities. This is ongoing work as we find what fits, especially at the middle school, now that we're down to 2 brick and mortar middle schools, to find those activities that best fit for Logan Middle and Longfellow, or maybe some change in the activities as the sequence goes. And you can also see a hole that we have is the CRVA. We have to find ways to be intentional to make sure that these students get the same career exploration opportunities, even in that virtual setting that we have in our brick and mortar. That's an opportunity for improvement for us. That is academic and career planning. Do you have any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions around the table. Okay, we can move on.
Indicator 3, I'm really excited about this one. So we've never seen this kind of data before in the school district of La Crosse. This is related to our standards-based grading work. Although at the elementary we've been doing standards-based grading for years, these sort of comments have always come in the form of a narrative on a school report card, which is really informative, but it's really hard to look at that qualitative data and be able to look at our students as a snapshot of where they are. This data is from Q4, meaning that it was compiled Friday. So a lot of in-depth takeaways aren't going to be my forte tonight. The elementary principals were able to look at this data today and come up with some initial thoughts as far as what they saw. But these are 8 different categories that our homeroom teachers took feedback upon from our specialist teachers and provided a score of a 1, 2, or a 3. And what you see are the percentage of students that scored a 3, so the highest for each of those categories. Our lowest area was listen attentively. 61% of our students scored at a level 3, with our highest being at 79%. We had demonstrate empathy and kindness. You can see all this data is broken down by different reference groups, and I think it's really interesting. For me, there's a couple next steps. Some of the things that I listed already. What is the percentage that we want to see as a goal? What's that just right number? So we'll have to do some research. Today I was talking to our elementary director, and her idea was to use our RTI model, meaning that we expect 80% of our students to be in that tier 1 universal, and then 15% in that tier 2, and then 5% in the tier 3. That makes a lot of sense to me. The way the indicator is written is that it's improved though, and it's tough to improve in year 1. So you are looking at baseline data here. I think it would be interesting at a building level to look at classroom discrepancies. Are there particular classes that are overinflated or underinflated, and why? What is that root cause? Some good conversations I think can happen. And then the third takeaway with the elementary data is to try to tie this information then to our PBIS system. Our PBIS system, we report behaviors that are out of the norm. How does that correlate to what we see on the report card? Are we over-reporting, under-reporting? I think it's just another data point to provide some validity and reliability to what we do with our different systems. So I'm excited about that. At our secondary level, this upcoming second semester of next year, we'll have a hybrid learning opportunity where our staff are going to start scoring on their habits of mind. So we'll start to be able to pull secondary data similar to this. I can't guarantee that next June, when we do this, I'll have a full complement of courses. We may have some data initially, just look at the secondary, but in the 2024-25 year, we'll have a full complement of data for you to look at. So those are next steps. Like I said, interesting because we've never had this data quantitatively before. So Do you have any questions about work and lifelong learning?
Questions from the board? Comments? Hearing none. Move on.
Indicator 4, youth apprenticeship. The percentage of graduating students successfully completing a youth apprenticeship will increase over the previous year. This is, think of like a work study or opportunities for our students, our juniors and seniors, to be able to spend part of their day on a work site, getting training, also earning credits, and also receiving compensation from an employer. I read today, as I was doing some research for the board meeting, that in the state of Wisconsin, 71% of students that do a youth apprenticeship end up being hired by the employer. So it is a great learn to work opportunity for our students, and it's one that's growing in our school district. You can see that our data for this particular year, we had 42 students, juniors and seniors, participate in a youth apprenticeship program. That is significantly up from the last few years. Jumping to the very end, we had 42 this year, 32 last year, and in 2020-21, we had 5. So this is an area that we are growing quickly in the school district of La Crosse. Dr. Rotering, if she was here, it deserves a lot of credit. She is building partnerships with these different businesses. She also has to work to make sure our curriculum lines up in a way that you can still earn that high school credit to be on a path to graduation. And as you can see, these partnerships are growing year after year. With the partnerships that she anticipates, she shared that preliminary they're looking at 60 for next year. So hopefully that'll be the number we hit, or even higher for next year's board report. We're thankful for all of our community members because it's work for them too. There has to be a directly responsible individual for each of these organizations to partner with the school district. It is a reciprocal relationship, and we appreciate the designated person at each of these sites to give these students experiences. It's a win-win for everyone. One area of improvement, obviously, when you look at the data, we are not hitting our reference groups with youth apprenticeships. Students in poverty in our different reference groups are not participating in youth apprenticeships like our white or more affluent students. So that is an area of growth. It's something that we look at the data, we talk to Dr. Rotering, and it's something we'll work on for the upcoming year. Do you have any questions about indicator 4?
I guess I have one question. I know that apprenticeship, that term, is new in the health field. And seeing what apprenticeships look like we know in the trades is a defined thing that has been built over time. In the health fields, it's not as well known. Are there pathways that Dr. Rotering, if you know, is looking at that may include more health pathways?
One area that I know she's working on is CNA, not just licensing, but actual direct application of the skills learned with the licensing. I believe Western next year will have a La Crosse school district only cohort of CNA students.
That started today. We have 13 school district of La Crosse students enrolled in that program, the first time that we've had that just for our students. That's fantastic. Yeah, I would say maybe one of the barriers is in order to technically qualify for youth apprenticeship, you need a course of study that is sequential in the same field that supports the youth apprenticeship that you're doing. So if you're going into a manufacturing setting, you would need some courses that kind of align with that background. If you're going into like an accounting setting, you would need some courses in business that align with that. And so for some of our students, they may not have taken those courses to set them up for success. So as we roll out youth apprenticeship and do a better job with our freshmen, sophomore, and juniors to prepare them for these opportunities, we'll ensure that they're guided along paths that allow them to have a qualifying youth apprenticeship experience. Another thing that's unique about youth apprenticeships is that you can't just work the front counter at Culver's. If you're in a youth apprenticeship, you have to have a variety of restaurant management and restaurant business type roles. And so you need to experience more than just a single thing in your youth apprenticeship. And that is sometimes a challenge for employers depending on the setting and what they have available. So we may have lots of students that are working great jobs after school but maybe it doesn't, at this point, we haven't created that relationship with the employer to create those unique opportunities throughout that couple years or 1 year opportunity. And so those are just kind of the unique barriers that we face as we kind of launch this, but it's still nascent, and I hope that at some point a third to half of our students are graduating with a youth apprenticeship experience, because it has proven to be so valuable to so many students.
So I have a question. How do students typically learn of the pathways? Is it typically the teachers that are teaching those initial courses kind of guide students towards those opportunities, or just looking at the reference groups? And I know last year we had a discussion about this too, how do we recruit or encourage students who aren't represented typically to get these paid opportunities?
Sure. Yes. Yes, the teachers that are teaching the initial courses do some of the recruiting. Dr. Rotering does go a bit of a roadshow and goes into different classes and talks about transcripted credit. What? You can get college credit while you're in high school? Yeah. So she does that work. So it's initially getting those students to sign up. So once we can get them in the courses, we can make sure that they're aware of the opportunities that exist. So that ACP, which was indicator 2, is really important for that, right? When you start to open your eyes as to what different career pathways may be, you start to take the right courses that then lead into the youth apprenticeship.
It takes a concerted effort between classroom teachers, school counselors, our career and tech ed folks in particular, Dr. Rotering. Everyone has to kind of be working together to ensure kids are on the right path, identify opportunities, mitigate gaps. So it is a bit of a network to make it all work out. And with 450 kids in each class, that's a lot of kids to ensure are on the right path. And but there's no reason we shouldn't be successful with that.
I have a question. So when a student identifies a path, let's say food and beverage service, just for example, and they've taken the prerequisite courses, they've been introduced to the program, they're made aware that the opportunity exists, how are they then paired up with the different partners? I just worry that there are some differences, for example, between an apprenticeship at Taco John's and, say, the Charmant or the Country Club, where, frankly, the earning potential is higher. And how are we tracking students in ways that have the potential of reinforcing, larger systemic imbalances that we find in the workforce?
Those are problems we look forward to having, given kind of where our data is right now. But I think there's two ways that students get kind of hooked up with a youth apprenticeship. One is an employer might know about this program, work with it in a different community, or had a student previously and is looking for another. They might reach out to a teacher or Dr. Rotering and just say, hey, I've got a great job, perfect for a student. Do you have anybody? And let's say that it's in a manufacturing job. Dr. Rotering might go to the school counselor or the welding teacher and say, hey, I've got a great opportunity. Who's a student that you think would be a good fit for this? And so that is one pathway. And then the other is a teacher or a counselor, Dr. Rotering, might have a couple of students in mind, like, I need to find 2 health professions opportunities. And so they'll reach out to their contacts. So I've got 2 kids that have taken the right things. They're ready for this opportunity. It's going to work out in their schedule. They're not credit deficient and other things. And then they'll identify an opportunity at Gunderson or Mayo that is pre-existing, they're kind of aware of, and then they'll reach out to that HR, those folks, and kind of line them up. So those are the general ways. And now as I'm talking through this, some of the barriers for students are, if you are credit deficient and you have to take some of these other things, that's going to be a barrier. If you have trouble showing up to school on a regular basis, that is going to be a barrier to participating in these types of programs. Sometimes if showing up to school regularly is a problem, the youth apprenticeship helps fix that, much like participation in extracurriculars. But there does need to be a base level of attendance in order to get you going, to pass your classes, to do these sorts of programs. So there are some some challenges for students that are in that kind of that highest tier of need.
And that prerequisite coursework requires licensed teachers in a particular area. We're working really hard with agricultural science to be able to shore that up so we can provide some of those opportunities as well.
Right.
But you need a licensed educator to get the initial coursework started.
And we hired an ag teacher this year. We're very excited to blossom that program and see where it goes.
I did put that on the tee for you, Dr. Engel.
Any other questions from the board? Comments?
Are there any other areas of need that you feel like you're looking for community partners on, whether that's kind of the line where we're looking for an ag partner from a curriculum standpoint or from a business area? I mean, are there partners or tracks? Dr. Jimenez came up, I mean, healthcare is definitely an area where there's a clear partner in the community and partners. Is there other areas of need that you're looking at?
I would love to see us expand our computer science presence in our community.
Okay.
That has been an area that's been tough. We did find a placement internally where they're helping with some IT support within the district, but externally would be great.
The challenge is sometimes there will be an employer who's maybe interested, but still has to work through like their HR practices for hiring somebody who's not yet 18. And state law allows us to, as long as the student's properly supervised, waive some of those rules that would otherwise require them to be 18. There are still limitations to protect students, you know, OSHA is still involved. But sometimes it's working with employers. They might be interested, but you know they've got to work through their bureaucracy and red tape before it works out for them. In other circumstances, we have students that have a really kind of niche interest where it hasn't been explored regularly before, and so it's trying to find even an employer who can imagine what that could look like. So it can go lots of different ways, but I think that with motivation and time, we've had no trouble finding folks. And I think recently with workforce shortages and everything else that's going on, people see this as a great way to grow your own. If I had to pick another area that we're figuring out and had a success this year, it's probably law enforcement and military, that branch, those pathways. We did have a student at Western though, work in their security department as a youth apprenticeship. And so that is perfectly launching them on to two-year college opportunity and then a law enforcement academy. So we are slowly finding some of those things. There's so many opportunities in the city. It's just a matter of like identifying a person, helping them understand the bureaucracy and then making it happen.
I don't see that law enforcement or military listed on this data. Was that just a function of like those happened after this was collected?
I'm not sure about the unique circumstances there. They could be a junior and so they haven't graduated yet, and so it would be for next year's data, or it may be classified under something other than, you know, as I characterized it.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Ruhecki. So just a reminder to board members that R3.2 is a subpart of R3, and we will approve R3 as a whole, not next meeting, but later in the year. So we will see this come by again. We've had the opportunity to look at the evidence, and then we'll get to see it and the other subparts next time. So we can move on to our next agenda item.
So the achievement gap reduction report, I'm going to steal a little bit of Dr. Lahacki's thunder. This is the Dr. Lahacki show tonight. So this report is required to be presented to the board by state statute 118.44, the achievement gap reduction law. The AGR law is the extension of a program previously called Student Achievement Guarantee in Education, or SAGE. So if you ever hear somebody saying SAGE, which is historic parlance for this new program called AGR, educational acronyms. And it provides funding to eligible school districts to put in place certain strategies to close the achievement gap. Under SAGE, the only strategy allowed was a student-teacher ratio of 1 to 18 in grades K through 3. Now, additional strategies are allowed, including one-to-one tutoring and instructional coaching by certified teachers. For the 2022-23 school year, the School District of La Crosse received $2,383,419.52 in funds to implement the AGR program. State law requires reports to be submitted to the school board at the end of each semester. This information can be thought of as a state-mandated monitoring report of our academic achievement. And no action is required tonight, but we are obligated to present it. Dr. Lahaki.
Thank you for that introduction. Well done. This is what you will find interesting, I think, is this glimpse of our K-2 data. We do have standardized assessments that start in 3rd grade, which I'll report out when they're available. But this does give you K-2 information. Well, it does K-3, but 3rd grade you're going to get in different ways. So our assessments that we use differ based on the grade level. Last year we tried to use iReady, which is a computerized assessment with our kindergarten students. The feedback we got from students and staff was it was a bit much, and we would prefer a more personal touch. Listen and understood, right? And so we went back to our traditional models of the letter sound assessment for kindergarten, which are in the fall and the winter, and then a DRA2 assessment in the spring. So it's progressive what students are expected to know at a particular time of year. So for letter sounds in the fall, it's just a baseline of 5 letter sounds and 20 in the fall, or in the winter, I believe. But then in the spring, we're looking for emerging readers with the DRA2 assessment. So if they schedule or score a 3 or higher, they're marked as on track. So when you look at the kindergarten data, know that it's progressive throughout the year, and it starts with letter sounds but ends with emerging readers. For math, for kindergarten, once again, number recognition assignment, basically, are they able to recognize the numbers 1 through 20? One of the things we'll keep an eye on, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a bit, we have a new elementary math curriculum in Vision, or primary resource, that has embedded assessments within it. We don't want to use those assessments in year 1 for our AGR, but we will keep an eye on it to see if some of those assessments provide us better data, and we may look at changing what we do for AGR for this new math resource. But we'll listen to what the teachers have to say on this particular one, what works, what doesn't. But this is our first year of implementation coming up. For our 1st through 8th grade students, but today it'll be just 1st through 3rd. It's iReady. This is a computerized assessment that's based on end of grade level standards. So you should see not a lot of students in the fall be at end of the year proficiency. That's normal, right? And then it should grow throughout the year. And then in the spring, that'll be the amount of students that are on track or ahead based on the grade level assessment. So don't be alarmed by that fall data point, because those same students that are on track, when they take the assessment next fall, will probably not be on track for the next grade level, if that makes sense. So let's look at some of the data in particular. For kindergarten, this is our DRA2 assessments. Once again, those emerging readers. We have 72% of our kindergarten students on track. And you can see how they're broken down by different reference groups and their performance as such. When you see NA, that means that there were not 10 identified students of that particular reference group. So NA's for Native American, Native Alaskan, or Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander. Where students may be represented are in 2 or more races. So this is based on what is self-identified in our student information system when you enroll as a student. The next page is interesting in that it gives spring of last year and spring of this year, which I think is a good way to look season to season to see where we were at last year and where we were at this year. And I know what Katie's going to ask. Do you have any pre-COVID data? The answer is yes. So let's take a look at the next one. which is our letter assessment data that goes back pre-COVID in the spring of 2019. You could see we had 82% of our kindergarten students at the DRA2, and that number dropped down to 58% in 2021, and we're on a slow incline. We're at 73%, but flat this year. So we did see a bump in our winter data, but that didn't follow through in our spring that we just had. And this is all kindergarten. For number recognition, we had 81% of our students on track. And you can see the different reference group performance on that. When we look at the comparison from this year to last year spring we were at 65%. In spring of 2022, this year we were at 81%. So we did see some math improvement overall, and in different reference groups as well. For the historical, back pre-COVID, 88% was our number. Non-applicable in 2020, that means that we did not give any assessments that particular spring. So that's always going to be a kind of an off year. We did not assess that spring when we were at a virtual. 78%, 65% last spring, and then we bumped back up to 81. So hopefully that trajectory continues. What we do see nationally, and we saw it locally, is that our reading scores did not drop as much as our math scores. Nationally, math was hit much harder with virtual instruction than reading. So we're seeing our reading scores locally and nationally bouncing back faster than mathematics. I think it's a good opportunity for us when we invested in that new primary resource, the Envision Math. It's a good time to reset the rigor and our expectations for what our students should know and be able to do. So we think we're poised to do well going forward with that new resource and the training that has gone with it. Now for our Ready data, once again, this is that computerized assessment. It is strongly correlated with the Wisconsin Forward. So when I look at the data for like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, we can look at the iReady data and make a pretty good guess of where students are going to also do on the Wisconsin Forward. So it provides us good information that way. But it's also a diagnostic assessment, meaning that it does list the standards that students may still struggle with. So teachers can look at that information and be able to make just-in-time adjustments to their instruction throughout the year. So you can see our end of iReady data for kindergarten is pretty much the same across the board, 57, 58, and 55%. Those are on track. Those are nice numbers to see, especially when you start to look at some of our historical. Now, our historical for iReady is only 2 years. Last year was our first year that we used it, so we can't go back too far with our iReady data. But you can see last spring, or the growth throughout the year, that's where I said it should be low in the fall and grow. So in the fall, like our first grade was at 13% of our first graders were already at end of year benchmarks. In the winter, it was up to 36%, and in the spring, 57%. So we should see that grow throughout the year. That's normal to see. For our historical, there are 2 ways I would say you look at this. One is compare season to season. One is look at your spring of 2022, and you can see in grade 1, 48% of our students were at benchmark. However, in spring of 2023, 57% were at benchmark. That's one way I would look at the data. The other way I would encourage you to look at it is cohorts. Following a cohort as they progress. So if you take your spring first grade of 2022, you're at 48%, then track them as second graders at the end of the year, and you can see 58%. So it's nice growth either way, but it's 2 different ways of looking at that particular data piece. Now for math. Math is, we did see some growth, but our 3rd grade scores, we did see a decline. So let's take a look at that a little bit. Our overall on track, 50%, 48%, 37%. We know we're lagging in math, and I mentioned before that's an area of focus for us for next year. That's where our professional development at the elementary level will live. And then the aggregate data as it goes from fall to spring, you can see the growth there. But the chart at the end is, I think if you look at those end of year, multi-year ones, that I think are the best charts that I would recommend that you take a look at. So if you look at math, you can see our grade 1, we were at 46% last year, 50, so just minimal growth, but some growth. Second grade went from 44 to 48, spring to spring. But then our third grade dropped from 45 to 37. And if you track the cohorts, you can see also there was a little bit of a growth from first to second grade, but then that dropped at second to third grade. I think if we do the math, that's our kindergarten and first grade year of COVID. So it does align with that COVID math issue that we're trying to work with. So this is a known issue nationally, and we're looking for ways to shore that gap up while still providing the rigor for the next year of instruction. It's challenging.
As just an anecdote to highlight that, although from high school, I was talking to a teacher, and they were talking about how, they were working on some problem graphing inequalities, I think, but they were applying it to geometry. And a student, because we had trimmed things, in that 2020 year, and then online made things more challenging, they had either not remembered or, which is common for students, but missed the graphing inequalities piece in algebra. And so when they had to apply that to geometry, the teacher found they had to reteach that kind of whole section of algebra so that they could apply that to geometry. And I think that just highlights some of the gaps and things that we're finding as we move forward. And it sometimes takes a year to really find out where that gap shows up. And it's likely the case for first, second, and third grade too, who really experienced the pandemic.
Can you talk really briefly about the difference between like the iReady reading or math assessment versus the local assessments? Because I'm noticing something really interesting in the data. In the local assessments, almost across the board, the winter to spring numbers show a decrease, actually. So the winter scores are much stronger. Now that is a product of the number of correct numbers, right, that they're expected to know. And so the spring, if you know 29 out of 30, you have made significant progress since the 13, number benchmark, but not quite to the end there. The iReady doesn't show that kind of winter to spring drop off, and I'm curious about the nature of the assessment.
Sure. So iReady is a standardized assessment. It's been well vetted, tested by a lot of students.
It's Curriculum Associates, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
Curriculum Associates. There are students all around the country that take iReady. So every question's been well vetted, and it is reliable and valid in that way. For kindergarten, we're using local assessments that we have determined the benchmark. So maybe we have the benchmark for winter a little too low or a little too high. That's why I would say for that kindergarten specifically, I would look year to year for the season, because it is an apples to apples comparison in that way. It's not standardized. If we're going to get in the weeds a little bit, DRA2 is an in-person, one-on-one assessment between a teacher and student. It's great because teachers actually hear the students read. It's not a digital assessment, but there's some variability that we find with how our teachers are scoring on these one-on-one sessions. And we were just talking about that today with the elementary principals, of how we can make that data a little bit more valid and connected to some of our standardized assessments.
Thank you.
Any other comments from board members? We can move on to the annual academic standards.
All right, so our annual academic standards, annual approval by the school board of academic standards is required by law, state statute 120.12 sub 13. The DPI has a rigorous process to identify and reevaluate academic standards on an ongoing basis. School districts generally adopt the standards that the DPI adopts. Academic standards are required to be adopted by the school board at the first board meeting of the school year after July 1st. Reframe that, after July 1st. Academic standards will be on the agenda as an action item at the July 17th board meeting for consideration of approval. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Lahaki for more detail.
Thank you. Standards are what students should know and be able to do. The way I describe it is, think of your house. The framework, the framing of your house are your standards. Every room in your house, think of it as a different content area. Your kitchen is math, or your living room is ELA, whatever. And then how you decorate each of these rooms is the curriculum. So we have a local assessments, we hang a picture here, we use this resource there, but it's all based on what that overall structure is of the framework of the house in the different content areas. New standards doesn't necessarily mean new resource. A lot of times there's some confusion with that. These standards are rigorously reviewed by educators across the state when they're publicly available, that people can provide input in different sessions. Generally, it is a freshening up, so there might be some word changes, some semantic type things, but not generally a huge overhaul, meaning that DPI has a timeline and a process to go through every content area. Then we look at what the changes are, and then we look locally at what we're teaching, what our resources are, and most of the time it's some tweaking on our end, some summer curriculum work, et cetera. And every once in a while you have a bigger overhaul, like we had with social studies more recently. But that cycle you see, which is part of the attachment, gives you a sense of where the different content areas are along this process and what's coming next by DPI over the next few years. The big three, so in the upcoming year, elementary, we're really going to continue to focus on standards and using the Orton-Gillingham science of reading strategies. Our secondary, elementary, I've mentioned this several times tonight, we'll have a new resource, Envision. So those are two elementary focus. And then at the secondary, we'll continue to work on our standards-based grading. Our next year's focus is more on the rubrics. Okay, we have essential standards, we have themes, we have all this information, but how do we actually assess these students using all these proficiency scales and things like that? We're contracted with CISA 4. They have some standards-based experts that, and this is pretty popular around the state, so we have some good resources to pull from that we're partnering with to help our teachers build those rubrics throughout the year with full implementation for next year.
Questions or comments from board members?
Just to clarify, this is the standards, this isn't the grading system.
Correct, correct. Yes. Yeah, there's a link there, and we have to publicly post this on our website, but you can go to that DPI standards website, and you can look at any of our content areas and see what students should know and be able to do.
So do we have to officially approve this each year, or we just have to be notified of this as a board?
You will approve it in July, or not.
Seeing no other questions or comments, thank you, Dr. Lehecki, for the long presentation tonight. All right. So the last information item we have, before we move on to announcements, is the OE12 facilities indicator. There's no recommended changes to our indicators for OE12 from the administration. This is an opportunity for administrators, if they want to discuss that further, they can. In the next meeting, we will, if there are no changes to the indicators, approve that template for next year in the board consent agenda.
There actually wouldn't be any approval unless there are changes made. It would just
So the
stay
template.
the same.
Okay. Got it.
So if the administration didn't recommend any changes, but the board wanted changes, how would that work? I don't know.
My understanding is that we would reject the proposal to make no changes, and then it would be up to administrators to change indicators.
I think this is an opportunity for discussion, and so if anyone has any thoughts for changes, we would note those and bring them back at the next meeting. We've made changes in the past based on, board recommendations, and at the end of the day, it is oftentimes when they were created, the administration made the recommendations and the board approved them. So ultimately, they're the boards. But if there's any ideas that folks have, we're happy to incorporate those as best we can and re-present it next month or next meeting.
I have a question. Indicator 6, where it says the district develops, maintains a long-range facility plan. So how is that plan monitored? Like just maintaining it? So, okay, we achieved that, but what do we do with that? And I know there's pieces of it that didn't happen, and so how does that process work?
Yeah, so as far as our long-range facility plan, recently that has been an administrative endeavor. And so we, after the facility, the long-range facility planning stuff that we did 3 years ago now, we wrote that long-range facility plan. We pursued some of those strategies. Some of them did not fail or did not work out. You know, the referendum was voted down. And so now we are in the facility advisory committee process, and the results of that will help us define the next long-range facility plan, especially as it relates to elementary and secondary facilities.
So the current plan talks about closing one or more elementaries. We've got a whole community process going on. If they came up with a proposal that was different, than, like, at what point does the board have any approval on any of this? This is just administration and the community making these decisions?
The board approves all closures of buildings, you know, so that will always come to the board. As far as the development of long-range facility plan, it has historically been a part of the board's purview and certainly can be again. We're just, you know, following this path based on the direction that we've received to this point and trying to put together something on behalf of the board. But we can certainly involve the board in a workshop or in an ongoing way.
I'm just trying to put together, so you have a plan, and a plan is a plan, like sometimes it doesn't always work out that way.
Yep.
And then we've got the Facilities Advisory Committee.
Mm-hmm.
They may have recommendations that don't fit with this plan, so then
True.
which one, where's the precedent and and then the other thing is, on a plan, there should be regular monitoring of the plan, and what is the process for that, Ben?
Yeah, our plan is relatively young. It's been written for, I think, less than 2 years, you know, and so the first monitoring of that, so to speak, was our referendum in November by the public, you know, so that pathway is, you know, terminated, you know, so that's not a strategy in our long-range plan for now. Or the foreseeable future, you know, so we're looking at that other portion of that. A lot of the feedback we got through the referendum process was people wanted community involvement in a different way. You know, we used focus groups and surveys the first time around, which is a perfectly viable strategy. Didn't lead to a positive outcome. And so we're pursuing a different strategy to garner public input, this facility advisory committee process. With that information, a report will be provided to the board and the administration, and we'll use that to develop the next long-range facility plan update. And the board can incorporate that however they choose. So happy to develop that in the long-range facility plan in a different way, but this is how we've been doing so for the time being.
So in terms of discussing whether we are approving no changes to the indicators and templates, or whether we have sticking points.
Yeah,
Is this
I
a
would just say,
sticking point
besides
for you?
maintaining the plan, there should be some sort of monitoring of the plan, or measuring progress, or something, a more active role than just maintaining. I guess that's what, I'm not good at wordsmithing.
What did you do in the past?
It came back to, I'm trying to remember, it came back to us, I mean, we didn't have it as part of an indicator, so it was different.
I would invite Joe up because he's been intimately involved through the years, probably seen all sorts of incarnations.
But we didn't have indicators in the past, so it was processed differently.
You know, I think in 2014, we finished the last plan, but what we did is we brought the plan back for review once annually to the board. And so then adjustments were made at that time.
And that's the last time there was a long-range.
That's the last time we had a long-range plan before this one occurred.
But there were a lot of in-depth discussions. I remember in
Yep.
16 and other years, like, we had some in-depth discussions about the plan itself. So even though it was developed at that point.
Yeah, and even with the facility advisory committee that we're working with right now, one of the things is looking at the two high schools and looking at what's being offered at both high schools facility-wise. And I think once that's done, we would be able to make some good changes to the plan based on their recommendations. And bring that to the board.
So is the plan, does the board own the plan? Like, it's our plan, or is it administration's plan? I'm like, I don't need to.
It's the administration's plan.
I would say the board decides what goes to referendum,
Right.
Always.
So at that
Okay,
point,
in
you
the-
can say, we don't want this to go to referendum and we don't want the community to vote on it.
I would say that the board has established this policy, and it says in OE 12, you must do all these things. With that information, we engage the community, and we've put together a plan on behalf of the school district. I think something kind of to your point that we could add to the monitoring report might be that the long-range facility plan is reviewed with the board on an annual basis or semi-annual basis, you know, so it's not just maintained, but maybe is reviewed with, or, you know, maybe there's some annual process, whether that's in October or November in advance of like budget season, or, you know, it could be incorporated into when we do the kind of district projects for maintenance. You know, there'd be a couple of different like natural times or twice annually where the board could review that long-range facility plan and validate it or confirm it or just see it.
Well, I appreciate that. I would also redirect us to OE 12.1, where it says the superintendent will develop and execute a facility plan that establishes priorities for construction, renovation, and maintenance that, and there's bullets underneath that. So we are directing the superintendent and his staff to create a plan that has our priorities at the forefront. So we have given the direction to the administration that this is what we expect in a plan, and now they go out and create that plan. So, I mean, in respect to, it is, the board has already given their determination, we have handed that responsibility. Now, if there are things that need to come before us, for example, referendum, for example, closure, then there are requirements and policies which specific, or even state law, which say we have that control, only we can make that decision. So I think we need to go back to, the indicator is that they will develop, let me just grab the right language, pardon me for a second. So the language is the district develops and maintains a long-range facility plan, but that is underneath the entire indicator, which says these are the things we expect to see in that long-range facility plan. So I think the board has already given its direction.
I can't talk to how I'm understanding this is our opportunity to discuss some of the policy, and I mean, having just been up for election this term, the public has a strong appetite for the board to have a little more involvement in facility planning than just handing it off to administration. I get none of us are like architects or any of that kind of stuff, and we shouldn't pretend we are. But at some point, the public elected us to have more input on facility planning. I mean, I think the results of the fall referendum tell you how unhappy they were. And I certainly heard from the public, and I hear from people regularly about they expect the board to have a little more than just handing it off to the superintendent. And well, if they give us a closure, we'll make a decision, but otherwise we're not going to make any decisions. I just feel that the public is looking for something a little bit more, and I think we should think about our policy. I don't have, again, a recommendation at this point, but I think we need a slight shift in our policy to move towards that.
So tonight, we're working on the indicators and not policy. We will have an opportunity in a workshop to look at our policies.
Correct.
And if that is the will of the board, we can discuss amending the policy language to give the board more of those pieces back. But I also want to counter the idea that the board wasn't involved in the referendum discussion or the discussions around the Lincoln closure. We did have a lot of conversation around that. So although we look to our experts for advice and information, we used that information to make those decisions to go to referendum. We didn't necessarily just say like, tell us what you think, we'll approve it. It was a board discussion.
Oh, certainly, certainly, I wouldn't argue with that at all. I mean, I listened to the Lincoln one here myself, so no, I totally agree with that.
Okay, so for tonight and the indicators for next time, are we feeling okay with these, or is that one going to be a sticking point where we would recommend that they come back with something different? Or if it feels more like a recommendation for policy change, is that something for the workshop when we discuss policies?
Can I clarify your question?
Yep.
So the question is whether we are currently unhappy with the data being given that speaks to these indicators, or if we are interested in having the discussion about
Right, so
writing
there's
new
like two
policy.
questions I think that are like hanging over my head and like how to proceed. So what I heard Ms. Sukla discuss sounded more policy change than
That's what I mean.
indicator. But for the purpose of disposing of this agenda item and looking just at the indicators, are we saying to administrators, go back and give us a different indicator for this? Or are we saying, these indicators are fine, we will discuss policy at a workshop? That's the question just to the board of what
My
we're doing next.
original point was that on indicator 6, that there be some, rather than just develop and maintain the plan, that there's some monitoring reports on it, or some progress reports or something that would be provided for regular updates. Because plans change.
But I would say that, I mean, when we're monitoring results like that, we're looking at student success and whether it's working for students. Like you said, as plans change, we can't know the success of a plan like that if the plan changes.
It's a lagging indicator. So by the time we get a chance to discuss the plan, probably things have already happened. There could be emergency situations that occur. We could be tying the administration's hands and dealing with things. So I think that's more of a policy conversation, to go back to what Ms. Baumann was talking about, or we need to talk about what is it that the board understands in this language, and then move forward from there. Because when, I think Mr. Korberg and I are the only two on the board currently that were here when these were created, and so I think the board needs to have a conversation about its understanding and where they stand as a board, we stand as a board, in the understanding of this policy and the indicator itself.
And I would offer up, it wouldn't be hard to add in reviews with the board annually, updates with any changes. Those would be very simple things to add, even
Well, and
on
I
to
think that's
indicator
been
6.
done. I mean, that's been done, it's just that
It's being done now.
Right.
It is,
You're
but I
given a
think
chance to
it's,
look at it.
yeah, it's one of those things that the public doesn't necessarily know about, because those updates given to us and discussions we had were in workshops that, although open to the public, we're in a different room and nobody comes. And I think that's part of what we're seeking to course correct in our discussion about holding our workshops here instead of moving rooms. Then the public would be aware of some of those conversations that we did have, but they were sort of behind closed doors, so to speak.
I would counter that. I would not say they were behind closed doors, not even partially, right? They were open. We
Yes.
did have those conversations. We had 2 years of conversations on facilities in open meetings in this room, actually in the gym during COVID times as well. So I want us to be very careful that we're
That's
not,
true.
Stating that something may have been behind closed doors when it never was.
I just meant the perception of it.
I understand.
Yeah,
I just want us to be very clear about that.
yeah, I agree.
All right, so here's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, indicators are good. We will discuss policy. And when policy is changed, the indicators would have to be adjusted naturally. You throw in some new language that demands something, they'll have to show us how they meet those.
Correct.
So there will still be opportunities, unless we also want to add in reviewing the long-range facility plan as like a separate information item or something in the agenda over the year, which is something it sounds like Dr. Engel is willing to do too.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, let's move on.
Can I pause real quick?
Yep.
So, are we wanting to make recommended changes to that indicator? Then we would bring that back for approval at the next meeting.
I'm hearing no, but we can do a vote, so everybody gets a voice if that's needed.
Can we vote on something that's in the information section?
Oh. Can we? Does parliamentary procedure give you freedom to do?
I'm the only one who had the concern around the table, so it's clear it wouldn't be a majority of the board, so I think we can just proceed as is.
Well, no, I think the question is an important one about when are we tackling the language, and what are we actually looking at tonight, and when do we start the process? Because remember, it's the two meeting question we talked about in our workshop. If we want to have that discussion, I think it's an important one, since we are a newly constituted board especially. According to our own procedures, do we need to start that now in order to address it more fully in the next meeting?
I think we've already started the conversation on the
right.
indicator, right? And so I think that if a board member, let's start there. If a board member feels like there is an opportunity here to make an adjustment, then they can bring that language to the next board meeting. And then we can have the conversation on that specific language of the indicator to determine whether we want to make a change or not. So, I mean, we've had some good conversation. I think Ms. Sukla brought up a point that is important to discuss. And so if Ms. Sukla, just because you brought it up, if you wanted to bring something different, for that indicator to look like at the next board meeting, then I think we as a board can then have a conversation surrounding that, and then we can figure out the yays and nays and whether it proceeds or not.
Which section will it be in the next board meeting and matters reserved for board action?
Oh, it would be, I think, where are we going to put it? Are we going to put it in, it would have to be in action.
Yeah, if you look at the agenda planning for June 19th, we have it under board consent agenda, but we could put it under a matter for board action.
And I think that, if a board member does have language that they want to bring forward, they can always reach out to the board president who sets the agenda. And then the board president can determine where it would fit best.
I guess my question about, and this is just for me to think on, but somebody may have a framework to help me think on it, is that the operating expectations are always in compliance or not in compliance. So if you're trying to measure, I don't know, the success of a plan, that just feels like a different area.
Like a result.
Right.
Well,
like
if I was understanding correct, that what you're looking at in indicator 6 is language around developing and maintaining. We want more specific language around how often and what we're being reported on. Is that your concern? Okay. I just need to clarify.
Yeah, and I guess your point is a good one, because so say the Facilities Advisory Committee comes up with something entirely different than what's in the long-range plan, and everybody thinks that's a great idea and goes with it. And so something in the long-range plan didn't happen, that's not a negative to the superintendent. So I think your point is fair.
I'm hearing review, bringing the board involved. So I think, like I said, I think that's easily accomplished. I would also offer up that while we have great norms around information and action, if it's an agenda item noticed to the public, the board can take action on it regardless of where it lies in the agenda.
Yep.
So that's something the board has too.
Can I ask one more question on where the sticking point seems to be coming from here? And maybe Dr. Engel or Brad or Juan, you have better categorical knowledge of the indicators, having been involved in writing them. So the Facilities Advisory Committee, where in our current policy or indicators is the creation of such a body accounted for? Or is it?
It is not.
Okay,
And I
so
think
that's
that
kind of the issue,
Well,
right.
but that's, part of the responsibility of the
Right.
administration,
That's
right?
part
That
of the
we
plan.
give the administration some latitude to determine how to create a plan.
Okay.
Right.
And I think that creates some confusion or disconnect in the public's understanding. I mean, I went to the first Facilities Advisory Committee, and then I'm like, I don't have any role as a board member, so I'm not, this is confusing to me. This is kind of a big deal. So just understanding that was just confusing.
Okay, so here's what I'm hearing this time. We do have a change to the indicator, and we are going to ask for, in the long-term agenda of the year, some information item where we will look at that long-range facility plan. It sounds like that's what Dr. Engel was proposing. Yes?
Maybe something like indicator 7, the district reviews the long-range facility plan with the board at least annually and anytime significant changes are made.
Mhm. Yep, in compliance. Yeah. Okay. Laura, is that good?
Yes, thank
Cool. Okay, let's move on to announcements. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Barrow.
I don't have any.
Okay. I have one. Our July 3rd board meeting is canceled due to the holiday. I'll turn it over to Dr. Engel for his announcement.
We have a facility advisory committee meeting coming up on June 11th. All of the information for those meetings is posted on our website. People are welcome to attend. The meetings are recorded. Just for clarification, we don't record the small group conversations because people aren't mic'd up. We couldn't capture that anyway, but any report outs or whole group stuff is absolutely recorded. I may have, June 12th, my bad. Sorry, June 12th. Yes, it's not a Sunday. No, June 12th. Thank you for catching that. So anyone who's interested in more information there, please seek out our website, reach out to the school district. Happy to provide any information that folks are interested in.
June 12th is also one of the dates for the following up on the second part. That might be a conflict.
Oh, that would be. We'll chat. That's all I have.
All right, so we'll move on to agenda planning.
I don't know how
Oh, yep.
this, in the olden days, for the announcements, if we had something that was important, and I wanted to talk about, if it's okay, there's a group that builds beds for kids in La Crosse County, and many of the beds go to students in our district. They've just delivered over 350 beds, and they're doing a big bed build, and they're looking for volunteers from the community. And it is, okay, June 24th, 10 a.m., the Mormon Coulee Lions Park, shelter number 2. It'd be great if any or all of you would participate. In full disclosure, my husband's the president of that group, volunteer president. We don't get any money out of it, but we talk about beds at our house a lot. And I get to go a lot of homes of our students, so that's always really very interesting. But you don't have to know how to build anything. You just show up, and we've got ear and eye protection for anybody, and we'll show you how to run a drill press or a sander or whatever you want to learn how to run if you don't already know. If anyone under 18 would like to participate, they have to have their parents and guardians' written permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and we can talk about how to do other board member announcements, because we haven't in my years here, we haven't traditionally done that, but if there's a will, we can do that. So thank you for sharing. We'll move on to agenda planning now.
Make a motion to approve the June 19th, 2023 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Ms. Berkedahl. We can approve the June, what is the date? June 19th, 2023 Board of Education meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, so for the sake of brevity, we're going to skip board debriefing, so, because we do have a closed session after this, and I want to be mindful of our 9 p.m. Limit and need to vote if we want to go beyond that. All right, so the La Crosse Board of Education will consider a motion to move into closed session on Monday, June 5th, 2023, immediately following the Board of Education meeting, room 209, pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, subsection 1F, for the purpose of considering financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons, except where paragraph B applies, which, if discussed in public, would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data, or involved in such problems or investigations. to wit, consider administration's recommendation to issue the conditional enrollment order. Is there a motion to adjourn to closed session?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, a roll call vote will be taken.
Ms. Burkett?
Dr. Garcia?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Dr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Dr. Sprague? Ms. Sukla?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann? Aye. The meeting is adjourned.